Well, today we have a big heavy lump of 1970s technology. This is the Rotel RX202 stereo receiver. Japanese company, made in China it appears. Rotels were not exactly the top end of hi-fi. They were not up in the same region as sort of Pioneers and things like that, and certainly not as revered as the possibly over-revered British hi-fi of the period with its minimalist designs. But they were generally, I think, quite well respected. There's a bit of codology going on here with this fake sort of heatsink here that you can see on the side of it, which I always thought looked quite cool. But it's plastic, so it's not actually a heatsink, it's total fake. It just makes it look more powerful than it is. They're actually only about, I think, 15 watts per channel, so in terms of power, quite weak, I suppose you'd say. But again, with decently modern, efficient speakers, that will fill the average room, to be honest, unless you live in a palace. It's quite nice styling, it's quite chunky. There was a Mark II version of this. I'm not sure the difference. Well, I think it was just a power upgrade slightly. Most of the ones I've seen were silver, not black. It's a receiver, which means it's meant to be the core of a separate stereo system, really. Quite often people would have had the separate amplifier and tuner. This combines the two, which is fairly common. Some purists would say the tuner should be separate so you get maximum fidelity, but to be honest, the tuner's not a very difficult thing to make. The usual controls you'd expect, your tone controls, volume and balance and things. Two sets of speakers switchable on and off here, and there's another thing about these which I'll show you in a moment. Couple of things that, if I bring it a little bit closer, you can see it's got these high fill, which I think is a top cut filter for trying to reduce, if you've got a lot of surface noise on your record, it takes some of that out. Loudness, which again is quite common in those days, boosts your bass and treble. Push it, if you've got speakers that are a bit too mid-range, it gives you a bit more of a boomy, bright signal. And tape monitor. So this is for your recorder. You're listening to FM stereo, for example, or phono, or you're recording a record onto tape, maybe onto a cassette, so you can use it in your car. Don't forget, children, home taping is illegal and it will kill the record industry. That's what they told us in the 1970s, and as you can see, we don't have any recording industry now. Sorry? Oh, okay. Yeah, so if you had a 3-head tape machine, if you were lucky enough to have a 3-head cassette recorder, you could monitor the sound off tape with this, because it'll basically switch you onto the tape output. You can't do that, obviously, by switching to tape if you're recording it, because you'll just get a massive feedback loop. Before we go any further with this, I'm going to turn the thing on. I've got it plugged in. There's no speakers connected or anything, but I want you to see its gorgeous dial illumination. Look at that. That is just brilliant. So you've got your AM, FM tuner scale here, you've got a tuning meter, you've got a lovely, that's all in nice green, you've got a lovely orange log scale at the bottom, all evenly lit, none of this sort of light at one end and dark at the other. Actually it is slightly darker down that end. There's also a stereo light, which I can't show you at the moment, and that's in a nice red. We'll see that later, hopefully. Just the sort of thing for turning down the lights and listening to a bit of Barry White. Anyway, let's have a look at some at the back end of this. We have an arrangement of socketry, largely DINs, unfortunately. Now, there were versions of this that had phono sockets. Unfortunately, that's not the version I've got. I've got the dreaded DINs, which you've got your phono input here, which is switchable between magnetic and ceramic, because you could still get ceramic cartridges in those days. That control looks a little broken, that switch, but I suspect it would be easily fixable, I hope. The ground, which post here, which you usually use for your record player. AM and FM aerial inputs, both 300 ohm and 75 ohm coax. Tape and aux here. A tape monitor. That's interesting, it's a separate one for the tape monitor. I need to look at the manual to see that, because I assumed that would just switch the tape output into there, but I could be wrong. As I said, you've got your two sets of speakers, left and right, which are switchable from the front, but you've also got another switch here which goes between normal and
Quadro sound,
What is quadro sound? As far as I can see, it's fake quadraphonic, which means that the front speakers get fed as normal with right and left, and the rear speakers get fed with the difference between right and left. It gives you a sort of fake surround sound. This sort of thing was quite popular in the 1970s. What else have we got? A couple of fuses which I assume are the speaker outputs, and look to be intact, which is good news. It's got a switched mains output which has got a screwed on cover over it, so I'm guessing that's screwed on because it didn't conform to UK mains standards. I'm not going to take that off because there's no real use for it. I'm guessing that's why it's covered up, and it may have been uncovered in other countries. Now, 70s hi-fi is becoming increasingly popular and increasingly overpriced on eBay, but one of the first things you need to do when you get hold of it, before you connect any speakers to it that you actually care about, you need to make sure that there's no nasty DC on the speaker outputs. And the way I do that is to get one of these big 8 ohm resistors here, which can sink quite a bit of power. Connect that up to a speaker lead. It's come apart here, but I'll do that now. Power on, and measure the volts across this resistor and make sure there isn't a massive amount of DC, which there isn't. It's pretty much 0 volts. Let's do the same for the other one. Same again, that's fine. So we are, I think, okay to connect speakers to this. I'll probably still connect some cheap nasty speakers to it first before connecting my decent hi-fi speakers. Right, so I put a couple of cheap speakers in here for the moment. Let's put this all back to normal. Put speaker 1 on, turn the volume down, put everything back to the middle, and perhaps go on to FM and turn the power on. I haven't got an aerial, so what we'll get I'm not sure. Slightly noisy volume control, but not too bad actually once I've worked it around a bit, and we've definitely got some FM and AM.
Was a very different place than it is now, and you know, I mean, the internet wasn't quite in its infancy, but it was certainly a pretty new thing in China. It was
yes, that's Talk Sport. Whether I can get anything on FM, as I said, I haven't got an aerial in it at the moment, but I'll tell you the big problem we've got here straight away, which is that I don't seem to have a lot of range on this tuning control. It only seems to work between just under 100 megs and 104. Maybe I should be able to get Star Radio then, shouldn't I? Let's try plugging the aerial in and see what happens. It's not a very good aerial that we've got here, but hopefully it might do something. Let me put on FM.
Richer. Will you be next? Enter now at winplus.co.uk. Win Plus. Great prizes, real winners. 18 plus, GB only, T's and C's apply.
Seize the great British summer with Deliveroo. From sausages and sun cream for sunny day barbecues to fiery Thai or hot wings for rainy nights in. We'll deliver your summer essentials, whatever the weather. From the restaurants and stores you love in as little as 30. Open the Deliveroo app and order now. If only the weather was as reliable. Geographical restrictions, service and delivery fees apply.
We do get FM reception, so it looks as if the basic thing works. Obviously, I've not tested all the inputs, but the controls all seem to work and don't have any noise on them, which is good for a thing of this age. So really, it looks like just a mechanical thing. See if we can get it apart and find out why we can't get very much range on that tuning pointer. Well, I have to say that trying to get this apart was a deeply unpleasant experience, and I got a splinter in my finger, which I also got the other week playing with that tape recorder. I much prefer plastic cases to wood, but then we are in the 1970s. At least we have some real sort of wood, not just a spray-on thing. But then the spray-on thing wouldn't have given me a splinter. Ow! I mean, ow! Ow! What do we see in here? Now we've got it apart. I'll tell you what, actually, why I couldn't get it apart. This thing here, there's a little grill which sits under there, and you can see some nice sharp nails here. Which also will probably injure me later on when I try to put it back together. They go into that bit of wood, but if I bring you in close to that little bit of wood, you can see that the wood has delaminated, so the thing has dropped out and fallen into here, and therefore stopped you, or stopped me really, pulling this whole thing forward, which is what is supposed to happen when I loosened all those screws. So, having finally got the thing out, I'm going to have to glue this wooden box back together put this bottom plate on, which I took off because I thought that might be the problem. Obviously it wasn't. Always take off the second thing you thought of, not the first one. And what can we see? Well, we have some actual cobwebs here, which I need to blow off. You can see the switch. Let's get closer. This switch here, the phono, which I said was a bit iffy, you can see that that has come apart really. So hopefully that just needs pushing back together and reset it. You know, I can sort of just push the metal back of the clamp. What's the word? Lugs, I think is the word. I can push that back and get that nice again. But the real reason we took it apart, of course, is to deal with the problem of the tuning only having a limited range. Now, there's a couple of things you need to know about the tuning. One is that if you take the knob off and twist the thing, you can see it's actually a bit bent. See, it doesn't go around in a proper circular fashion. It looks like the shaft of that control has been hit quite hard and bent. So it's yet another one that's suffered from a Newtonian encounter. Now, why would that stop it working? Because I don't think that's actually impeding it. When I look at the flywheel thing, it seems that it goes round. But what I can also see, if you look at the way it's wound round the back of that flywheel, you can see it sort of winds back on itself. It's not a straightforward wind. There's a little bit of a fray in the cord, and when it gets to the point where it doubles back on itself, it stops going round. Now, how has it got like that? Did somebody wind it on like that? I doubt that. I mean, they'd surely have known it was wrong if they rewound it like that. Did the drop cause it to just disengage somehow, or is the fact that it's slightly off centre cause it to disengage? And if that's the case, can I actually flip that back into place and get it to run round properly without having to take the whole cord off? Now, it doesn't actually look a very difficult restring, and I have got the diagram for it, but I'm hoping I might just be able to do it with a pair of tweezers really and get it back in shape. I'm slightly worried about that fraying around there. I don't know if you can quite see it, just about there, that it might at some point come apart, and I'm not helping really by tweaking around with it in this state and stressing it, but I have a feeling I might be able to do something about this, you know. Mind you, I've had lots of feelings in the past, and a lot of them have turned out to be bad ones. Well, would you look at that? It's not quite. It's got it further. I can get it to one end of the scale now. Oh, now it's stopped again. Okay, it's difficult to get a good viewing position on this because I've got to get the camera in, and actually can't see when I've got that there. And I suppose I could look at the screen and that might help me, but I always find that a bit difficult. And that ferrite rod is a bit in the way. But what's happened here is, I think it is a problem with the cord itself, because that frayed bit is causing us an issue. And the issue is this: if I turn it, you see there's that little frayed bit there. So I can go all the way to the other end here. It moves up and down on the shaft, but that's not necessarily a problem. I've turned that all the way now to 80, I think that's the low frequency end, yeah, that's the 87 end. So I'm coming back up here now towards the high frequency end, and if you look, there's a point where that frayed bit comes back, and when that happens, you see it jumps there, because it's a little bit thinner at that point of the cord. It jumps over there, and then it gets stuck in a loop and stops, because it's now crossed over, so you've got a crossed loop there. If I, again that's going to be difficult to do without, if I push my pliers in there and artificially hold it so it doesn't jump, you can see it goes all the way, and now I can get it over to 108 with some horrible grungy noises, but now it's okay, you see. As long as I hold it there, it stays okay all the way up, and I turn it back. There's the frayed bit again. It goes through that way, that's fine. Goes all the way back, come back here, spreads itself out a bit, gets to the thinned out bit, and jumps across and breaks. Well, it doesn't break, jumps across and twists itself into an impossible position. So I think basically this is a restring. Oh well, is there anything we can't make worse by trying to improve things, eh? We should have learned that on this channel by now. So I've restrung this and we've still got the same problem. It gets to a point where it just pulls itself off and twists itself up, and I don't seem to be able to get around that in any way. Even if I try moving this up here to give it a bit more space like that, it just moves itself back and locks itself up in the same way before it gets anywhere near the fully closed part of the tuning capacitor. Now ignore this loop here, because let's just try and give me a bit of leeway to change the tensioning. This is a really odd system because there's a tensioning spring on this side and there's one that you can't see on the other side as well, and I thought maybe this is a tensioning thing. Getting the tension right on both sides is correct, and I tried tightening it up on both sides, but what that seems to do is, I think it's a bit too tight because it's not spinning correctly as a flywheel should. I know this is bent, but this the tuning knob itself is bent. You can't see that in shot, but the flywheel is straight. I've tried moving this around a little bit, but it doesn't seem to be any better with the new cord than it was with the old cord. And I've checked that both the cords are, well, the cord is the same as the old one. It's 0.6 millimeters. So I'm beginning to run out of ideas of how to fix this. Right, I've had many goes at fixing this and mostly come to naught. I tried changing the dial string a couple of times to different thicknesses, different weaves, so they might have a bit more grip. Tried polishing up the handle on the big front door, no, the shaft on the flywheel there, and none of those made any difference. I also replaced the springs. The springs had got a bit manky on here, so I put new ones in. They weren't that bad originally. It was because I was twisting and moving them around to try and get the tension right, and the original springs were beginning to look a bit pants after that, so that didn't make a lot of difference either. So earlier I thought this thing of the wind moving up and down the shaft wasn't a problem, but now I think it is. And having looked at what other people have said, not about this one particularly, but about other tuning mechanisms exhibiting similar faults, I think it's actually supposed to stay where it is. And I think the only thing that can be the problem there is the flywheel assembly and the shaft that it rotates on. And I can't get another one of those. They're absolutely unobtainable. But what I have found is that if I get a bit of copper wire from some twin and earth cable here, and wind that into a very intricate position so that it's pushing back again. So I've secured it under, I want to be careful here because I've got the power on, but I've secured it under that thing there and pushed it against there, and that puts enough tension on the end of that so that I can now wind that back, and as I start tweaking it again towards up to the top end, it now stays where it is, doesn't cross over itself, and I can get up to the top end of the scale. So that seems to have done it, although it's a bit of a rough and ready fix, but I couldn't think of anything else. If anybody has any better ideas on how it should be dealt with, or what I could do short of getting somebody to build another flywheel assembly, which it's not really worth it for this set to do that, but that seems to have sort of fixed it. Now another thing I found here is I don't think the FM side is quite in alignment. First of all, when it's not tuned in, that tuning needle, you can see, isn't at 0. It's sort of, what, 40% or Mark 4 on there. It does move as you tune into a station, so that does seem to indicate something, but I think there should be more difference than that. The other thing I've noticed is that when you're in stereo and you're right on the station, that stereo light doesn't light up. When you detune it slightly, then it comes on. So I think that's somehow off as well. I'm going to have to look up what the alignment instructions are for that. The AM side seems fine as far as it can be. It's only got that tiny ferrite rod aerial there, and obviously you wouldn't be rotating this thing and there's no... I've seen some old tuner amps which have got like a rotating lever so you can move the ferrite rod. This doesn't have that. Of course it's got an external AM aerial, but only 6 people in the history of domestic audio ever used one of those, if they weren't radio amateurs or something like that and had a bit of expertise in that area. And there's only 2 stations left on medium wave in this area now. So I think I'll have a look at trying to get the FM alignment right. I know the pointer is in the right place now, but the FM does seem to be a bit out of whack, and that maybe that I can improve that. Well, so I realigned the FM and it's all working now in terms of the stations are in the right place, the stereo lights coming on properly. But I did feel that the sound, now I've got it on the big speakers now, and I thought the sound was a bit feek and weeble really, and I wondered if really the amplifier may need a bit of capacitor changes and things. But then what I did was plugged in a feed through the DIN socket, and it's absolutely fine. And I've tried it the same with the phono, and that's fine as well. I'll let you hear some of that in a moment. And I did then decide to recap the radio part. So I did change all the capacitors in the radio section. I even tried to change this one here until I realised it was an inductor. Oops. I wonder why I couldn't find it on the circuit diagram. Anyway, having changed the electrolytics, there's a small improvement. They were all measuring mostly okay, but one of them claimed to be a diode according to the tester, so maybe that was a problem. But it obviously wasn't in a critical position. But it still sounds a bit naff on FM, really. And the amplifier itself is fine. I haven't bothered changing capacitors or anything in there. I don't believe in mucking about with things that are basically working. It just seems that it's not a very good design of tuner. Now, I seem to remember at the beginning of this video I said, oh, tuners are easy. There's no real reason, is there, to have a separate tuner and amplifier, but perhaps there is. It's a shame that with that lovely illuminated scale, the thing that looks like the central feature of this thing is just a bit suboptimal. Nevertheless, I still think this is a good set, and I'm glad that we managed to get it working again. I'm going to just show you what I mean about the relatively poor quality of the tuner in this receiver now. I've got a station tuned in on FM on here, and I've also got it fed from my Technics tuner via the aux channel, and we can hear the difference by switching between them. So we'll start off with the Technics tuner.
Some results go in our favour.
That will do, thank you very much.
This is beautiful to watch.
So then let's turn over between that and the tuner built into this receiver.
The crayons, the toys, the teddy bears, all kinds of around there.
So it's reassuring to know you can rely on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
And it's there!
It's delighting the home supporters.
Our commitment to covering the posh and the used throughout the season is the same as ever.
In absolute dreamland at the moment.
So you see there's absolutely nothing wrong with the amplifier, really. The amplifier sounds fine when it's fed with a proper signal, but the tuner
Live sport in Cambridgeshire
Yes.
is
BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
sounds really harsh, very poor tonal balance.
BBC
Radio Cambridgeshire.
Apparently, this is scientifically proven, backed up, that listening to nature reduces our stress levels by 35%. Incredible.
Well, not if you're listening to it on a rather bad receiver. I'm going to also, just to prove finally that the phono bit does work now that I've fixed that switch, I'll feed you some stuff from my record player. So I've got it switched to phono. Let's hear that traditional old sound that we don't hear much anymore. Bit of surface noise there. This is quite a bass heavy recording, so I should show it off quite well. I'm hoping we don't get a copyright hit on this, it's quite obscure. So there you go, a snippet of music there from the record player. Took a bit of setting up because my dual turntable isn't in tip-top condition at the moment, and that needs a bit of refurbishment. We might cover that on the channel if I ever get around to doing the work, which is, well, it's a possibility. Oh, I just thought, why not give you a taste? I've actually plugged the speakers into 2 rather than 1, because I can give you a taste of what the Quadro sound actually sounds like. So here's our normal, what you get from the front 2 speakers. I'm going to switch it to the Quadro sound setting. I don't know if you can really hear what it is. It's very thin and spread out. It's basically the 2 speakers taking the difference between left and right and putting it out of phase. So it probably doesn't come across very well on a mono microphone. And it just provides a bit of atmos in the back speakers, really. Hardly worth it, but I suppose very cheap to implement, and a sort of gimmick you could put on it in those days. I do quite like this unit, especially now I spend a fair bit of time on it. It's such a shame that the tuner section is so rubbish, and as an amplifier it's pretty good actually. I'd quite happily put it in a room somewhere with a pair of speakers, if I could find a room that I haven't already filled with amplifiers and speakers that would not result in divorce proceedings. So if anybody has any ideas on how I could do a better job with the tuning control fix than the hideous bodge that I've done, although the hideous bodge seems to work, then do get in touch in the comments, and maybe we can come up with something better. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next one.